Melissa Harper mops the glass doors of a Detroit tech firm by night and studies ancient Greek by dawn. Labeled only by her uniform and silenced by assumptions, no one ever asks her what she knows, until a whispered translation catches the ear of the company's CEO. Detroit, January. The kind of morning where even the wind feels tired. Aeon Systems Inc. sat like a sleek, silent beast on the city's east end. 10 stories of brushed steel and glass, pulsing with data and ambition. At 6 a.m., the lobby echoed with early footsteps and the hiss of coffee machines. Programmers and product leads streamed through the glass turnstiles, with eyes fixed on phones and minds already deep in code. And in the corner, wiping those very glass doors, was Melissa Harper. Her uniform was slate gray, the logo printed slightly off-center on her chest. No name tag, no greeting. Just Miss Clean to some, Madam Mop to others. She didn't correct them. What was the point? She kept her eyes down, not because she had nothing to say, but because she'd learned that saying the wrong thing, anything, could cost you a shift, a warning, a job. She had mouths to feed. Silence was survival. At 9:30 a.m., her shift ended. She boarded the bus, face pressed against a fogged window. 20 minutes later, she was home. A one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint, a broken space heater, and the hum of traffic outside. Her nephew, Miles, 10 years old, sat cross-legged on the couch, watching science videos on mute. His dad was in prison. His mother, Melissa's sister, had vanished 3 years ago without a goodbye. Melissa set a cup of instant noodles on the table, peeled open an old Latin dictionary, and rested her elbows on a cracked kitchen counter. Her fingers traced faded notes on a library printout of Plato's Credo. Once, this had been her life. She had been a star student, linguistics major, ancient languages concentration, fluent in Latin, halfway through Greek. She wanted to teach, write, translate, make dead words sing again. Then her mother died of a stroke. The scholarship vanished. The rent didn't. She dropped out the same week she buried her mom. That was 7 years ago. Now she scrubbed toilets and microwaved philosophy. The only thing that hadn't changed was her voice. Rich, measured, low. But no one ever heard it, not the real version. And when she did speak, people flinched. Your voice is rough, one recruiter once said. You sound angry, another offered. She wasn't angry. She was tired. That week on a Wednesday, she overheard it again. Walking past the HR lounge, 2 coordinators were chatting. Miss Clean, one snorted. She's sweet, but let's be real. That voice, she couldn't string 2 sentences in front of a client. They laughed. Melissa walked on. It wasn't the insult that hurt. It was how confidently they said it, like truth, like gospel. But the real gospel was in her backpack, a stack of handwritten notes, her own translations of fragments from Heraclitus and Plato. She'd been teaching herself for years, at night, by memory. Nobody knew. Nobody asked. Then, on a Thursday night near midnight, it happened. Melissa had been called to clean one of the executive conference rooms. Some engineers had left it in a rush. Coffee rings on the table, snack wrappers in the corners, laptop cords still plugged in. One monitor was still on. A single tab was open. Greek. Ancient Greek. The font was a little janky, but she recognized it instantly. Republic. Book 6. The Allegory of the Cave. She froze. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. The familiar curves of the words danced like old friends. Without realizing, she spoke softly, carefully. She translated a line aloud, her voice low but confident. And if he is compelled to look at the light itself, will he not have pain in his eyes? And will he not turn away? Behind her, someone had entered the room. She hadn't heard the door. A man stood there tall, in a winter coat still dusted with snow. No badge visible, no folder in hand. Just quiet presence. She froze, dropped the cloth, turned sharply. It was him. Edward Lawrence. CEO. Founder. The name on every hallway plaque. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just looked at her. Melissa's pulse climbed into her throat. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I wasn't touching anything. I just—" "Was that Plato?" he asked, voice neutral. She hesitated. "Yes, sir. Republic." His brow twitched just slightly. "You speak ancient Greek?" "No, sir," she replied automatically. Then softer. "I read it." He looked at the screen, then back at her. "How?" She licked her lips. "Library books. Memory. And time." He didn't answer. Just nodded once and walked out of the room. She stood frozen for a full minute, mop in hand, heart hammering. The door clicked shut behind him. The next morning, when she arrived to clock in, a receptionist called her name. "Melissa Harper." She flinched. "Mr. Lawrence would like to see you. 18th floor." The air left her lungs. 18th floor. Nobody from her department ever went above floor 3. She took the elevator in silence, surrounded by mirrored walls and stale perfume. Her reflection stared back at her, creased uniform, trembling hands, hair tied back too tightly. When the doors opened, she stepped into a different world. Hardwood floors, low music, white light. A wall of awards glinting behind a glass case. A secretary escorted her to the last office on the right. "Go ahead," the woman said with a warm smile. "He's expecting you." Melissa entered. Edward Lawrence was standing by the window, sipping coffee. He turned slowly. "Melissa Harper," he said, not as a question, but like a discovery. She nodded, stiff. "Yes, sir." "Please, sit." She did, carefully. Her eyes scanned the room. No camera, no notepad, no HR rep. Only him. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Where did you really learn Greek?" She took a breath. "My mother taught me Latin when I was a kid. Church Latin. Then I studied classical languages in college. But I dropped out. Family stuff." "And you just kept going?" She nodded. "I didn't want to forget how to think." He blinked, then chuckled softly. "That's a better quote than anything we've printed in our strategy decks this year." She didn't smile. He leaned forward. "I'm working on a new AI initiative. Semantic mapping. Language modeling. We've hit some snags. The engineers, they're brilliant, but they think in code. We need someone who thinks in meaning." "I'm not a linguist anymore," she whispered. He shook his head. "Clearly, you still are." Silence settled between them. Finally, he said, "Would you be willing to consult, just for a few days? Help the team decipher some idiomatic structures. Nothing permanent. Just see where it goes." Melissa sat very still. People didn't offer her things. Not like this. Not in sunlight. She nodded once. All right. He smiled. Not broadly, but real. Thank you, Miss Harper. And Melissa. Yes. Thank you for speaking. The hallway to Aeon Systems R&D wing felt colder. Not in temperature, but in tone. In how people paused when they saw her badge. In how they glanced down at her shoes, and then to each other. Eyebrows silently raising questions they didn't voice aloud. The badge was temporary. White sticker. Her name printed in thin black letters. No department, no title. Just Melissa Harper. Guest consultant. The word guest never felt so conditional. She entered the lab at 8:05 a.m., holding her breath. Sleek desks, twin monitors, virtual models on glass walls, everyone in jeans and black t-shirts, lanyards around necks like modern dog tags. A young man with bleached hair looked up from a cluster of tablets. Can I help you? I'm Melissa, she said, unsure of her volume. Mr. Lawrence asked me to assist on the semantic AI project. A moment of pause. He blinked. You're the one who... Read Greek. She nodded once. A longer pause, then... Okay. Sure. Yeah. Come sit. He led her to a standing desk, clearly pulled in from a supply closet. A second-hand monitor blinked weakly to life. Her first instinct was to lower her head. Blend in. Not interrupt. But something inside pushed back. Not anger, exactly. More like quiet defiance. She unpacked her folder. Latin, Greek, notes in pencil. She was used to paper. This was a different kind of battlefield. At noon, someone left coffee on her desk. No note. Just a cup. Too hot to drink, but warm enough to notice. By 3:00 p.m., she was drowning. The interfaces were unfamiliar. API trees, neural nets, cloud environments she'd never touched. She didn't know where to type, let alone how to submit a pull. Just hit deploy, someone muttered behind her. She nodded, pretending to understand. That night, back in her apartment, she opened her notebook with shaking hands and copied every term she didn't know into a spiral pad. She stayed up until 2 a.m., watching YouTube videos on machine learning, scribbling translations for herself in the margins like she did when she was 19. She wasn't dumb. She was out of place. There's a difference. By Thursday, she had found the error. The AI couldn't distinguish between context-driven idioms and classical syntax. It kept mapping ananki, anagi, as food, instead of its true meaning, necessity. She stared at the screen. Of course it got it wrong, because the word need doesn't mean hunger in Greek. It means fate. It means must. It means the edge of a sword. She rewrote the semantic tree manually, then annotated her changes with margin notes, quoting Sophocles. Nobody clapped. Nobody even noticed. Until Friday. She was sorting a bin of old lexicons someone had dumped by her desk when she heard a voice behind her. Did you write these? She turned. Edward Lawrence stood there holding her notes in one hand, a tablet in the other. She nodded. Yes. He glanced down at the paper again. You just saved this team 3 months of rollout delay. She blinked. I did. He nodded. We couldn't get the AI to interpret imperative necessity in context. Your cross-referencing fixed it. The room was suddenly very quiet. Half the engineers were frozen mid-code. She nodded slowly. Glad I could help. He didn't say anything more, just clutched the notes and walked away. Later, in the restroom stall, Melissa let herself cry. Quietly, quickly, like a valve being turned off and on. The kind of cry that you finish before anyone notices. The kind she'd perfected. By Monday, she had a formal email in her inbox. Temporary linguistic consultant. 2-week extension. A small stipend. No title change. When the internal marketing team prepared a project spotlight for the company blog, they didn't include her name. She's not exactly on brand, someone wrote in a Slack thread she wasn't supposed to see. One person had posted a suggestion. Maybe we list her under support, or not at all. She didn't reply. She wasn't there for the spotlight. She was there for the syntax. That week, her nephew Miles looked up from his math homework and asked, "TML, is it true you're the smartest person there?" She laughed. "No, baby. I just don't give up as fast." He smiled like he already knew. Tuesday morning, she came in early. Her desk had a clean screen, and on it, someone had left a sticky note. "Your translation of Aletheia changed the way I think about this entire model. Thank you." It wasn't signed, but it was in blue ink. On Wednesday, one of the interns handed her a coffee. "I read your annotations on the Homeric corpus," he whispered. "They opened something in my brain." She smiled for real, maybe for the first time all week. The next day, Edward Lawrence asked her to meet him in the main auditorium. "Why?" she asked. "Because I want you to speak," he replied. She froze. I don't do speeches." "You speak ancient Greek, Melissa. I think you'll manage." "I sound..." She hesitated. "People say my voice is..." "Your voice is exactly what they need to hear," he said. "I don't know what to say." "Then tell them the truth." Friday afternoon, she stood at the front of the room. Rows of engineers, analysts, project managers, interns. Some had never seen her before. She took a breath. "I'm not from here," she said, her voice trembling. "Not from this floor. Not from this world." Silence. But I've spent the last decade reading people who've been dead for over 2,000 years. And what I've learned is this. You don't need to be someone important to do something important. The room didn't move. Most of my work was done in silence. In kitchens, in laundry rooms, at bus stops. But words still matter. Even whispered. Especially whispered. And then she closed with the same line she first read that night in the conference room. "And if the eye is turned to the light itself..." Her voice didn't waver. The room was still. Then, applause. Real. Loud. Sustained. Somewhere in the middle row, someone whispered, "Who would have thought?" Melissa heard it and smiled. The applause faded, but the echo remained. Melissa stepped off the stage, eyes still wide. Her heart was pounding like it had outrun something ancient. She didn't remember walking back to her desk. She barely remembered what she'd said. But she remembered the silence. How it wasn't empty this time. It was full. Heavy. With something real. For the rest of the day, people looked at her differently. Not with awe. With recognition. A young woman from marketing caught her in the hallway. "I was afraid to speak up," she admitted, eyes darting around. "But after today, will you help me find my voice too?" Melissa blinked, then nodded. "Always." That night, she opened her Slack for the first time. There was a new channel, hidden voices, and pinned to the top, a message from Edward Lawrence. We are surrounded by brilliance we've been trained not to see. It's time to look again. People were joining, dozens, then hundreds. Stories poured in. Janitors who wrote poetry, security guards who'd taught languages overseas, cafeteria workers with architecture degrees from back home. Someone from facilities mentioned he'd once taught physics in Tehran, and then came the message that stopped her mid-scroll. I used to teach Farsi. I'm one of the night guards. If this company needs help with Middle Eastern corpuses, I'd be honored. He signed it. Farid, Level 2 badge. 2 days later, he was invited to join a regional localization project. Ripple. After Ripple. After Ripple. By the following Monday, the HR department launched a company-wide initiative, the Aeon Internal University. It wasn't about degrees. It was about development, mentorship programs, language learning tracks, guest lectures from inside the building. Melissa was invited to lead the first workshop. She called it How to Speak Without Being Asked. The line outside wrapped around the corridor. One morning, Edward stopped by her new desk, located not in a back hallway or temporary workspace, but in a real, full-time department. Her title, Semantic Interpretation Coordinator, Linguistic AI Division. On her desk, in a simple black frame, hung her old janitor badge. No bitterness, no shame, just memory. A reminder that she hadn't come out of nowhere. She came from somewhere very specific. A week later, Melissa walked through the halls and noticed something different. People didn't just look at her. They saw her. And not just her, but each other. Like how the overnight shift started joining stand-ups. Like how someone from the cafe now managed inventory systems for campus events. After someone asked about his math background and found out he held a degree in logistics from Nairobi. Or how interns no longer whispered when someone with an accent joined a call. Because now they understood. Fluency comes in more than one form. Then, something small, but everything. Her nephew Miles came home from school and handed her a folded sheet of paper. I drew you, he said proudly. Melissa opened it, a child's drawing. A woman in a white shirt standing on a stage, holding a book in one hand and a microphone in the other. At the bottom, in clumsy, bold letters, My aunt speaks ancient words. She pressed the paper to her chest, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. Until her phone buzzed. It was from Edward. Quick thing. Meet me in the lobby if you're still here. She walked down. He was standing near the entrance, arms crossed, a plaque in his hands. New installation, he said, nodding toward the front wall. Thought you might like the inscription. Melissa turned. A matte steel panel had been embedded beneath the company logo. Clean, subtle, no signature, just words. Talent wears no uniform. Respect has no rank. Listen before you judge. She didn't speak. Just let the words sit in the air. He looked at her. Do you know what happened when you started speaking? He asked. She raised an eyebrow. What? You gave others permission. She didn't reply, just nodded slowly, feeling it all. Every shift, every stare, every silence that had turned into sound. Before she left for the evening, a young intern stopped her in the elevator. Hey, she said nervously. What are you reading? Melissa held up the paperback, The Dialogues of Plato. She smiled. Something no one used to want to hear. The elevator doors closed behind her. Months later, Melissa was invited to speak at a national AI and ethics conference in Chicago. Her panel was titled, "The Intelligence We Ignore: Hidden Talent in the Margins." She stood at the podium facing hundreds of tech leaders, researchers, investors. "I was once told my voice didn't belong in rooms like this," she began. But, but it turns out my voice was never the problem. Your listening was. Silence, then applause. Later that night, she received a message from a data scientist in Argentina. "I sent your story to my mom. She works as a cleaner at a school and used to study languages." She cried. She said, "Maybe it's not too late. Thank you." Melissa closed the laptop, hands trembling, heart full. It had never been about a badge or a microphone. It was about being heard. Now she made sure others were too. Not loud, just real. And that was enough to change everything.